Some moments define who we truly are, not the victories, not the weapons, not the grand fleets crossing the stars. With banners raised high, no, humanity is judged by the moments when we choose compassion over survival, when we choose to walk into darkness because someone else is trapped there. Tonight's story is that moment. If you believe humanity still stands for courage and mercy, listen closely, then share this story so others remember, because helping these people meant death was guaranteed. And still, 2,000 human doctors stepped forward. No one knew where the signal came from at first. It tore through the galactic relay network like a scream echoing across the void. Weak, fractured, desperate, a medical distress call from a distant colony. Named Liras Ninin, that human not allied, unknown to most, a species on the brink of extinction, was begging for help. When the data reached Earth, it was already too late. For many down there, at least, that was what everyone assumed. You remember waking before dawn, the air cold and silent. Your holo tablet glowed on the bedside table. The alert pulsed with crimson light, a sound you had only heard during wars and catastrophic disasters. You reached for it. With shaking hands, the words burned in your mind: pan-galactic medical emergency, quarantine zone, fatal transmission, risk, mortality rate, absolute. No survivors expected. Bellow. That a single line of volunteers requested at personal risk. The room felt smaller, the silence heavier. You stared at the message like it was calling to something inside your chest. You knew what volunteering meant. You knew exactly what the risk was. You knew there was no return, and yet you pressed accept, not because you imagined glory, not because you wanted recognition, but because no species deserved to die alone. Across Earth, across Luna, across the orbital cities, floating like lanterns in the sky, thousands made the same choice. Doctors, trauma surgeons, emergency medics, nurses, scientists, paramedics, who had already seen too much death. In their livest numbers rose fast, faster than anyone expected. Galactic officials were confused, then horrified, then speechless. Beques, every human signing up knew there was no Koreat. Still they volunteered. In 30 to 100, 901, 1,600 be sunrise to 1,000 confirmed, all prepared to step into a place where every breath might be their last. Aboard the medical flagship Nightingale, the briefing chamber was silent when Commanding Admiral Amina Herod Enterage looked at each one of you not as soldiers, but as healers, as humans. Your voice wavered as she spoke. None of you were required to come. No order was issued. You were asked to stay safe. Yet you stand here ready to face the fire, not to fight, but to heal. Inhaled slowly. If their world falls silent, it will not happen while they face death alone. You could feel the room absorb those words like a pulse of electricity. Through the air, the voyage to Liras 9 took 11 days of deep space travel. Enough time for everyone on board to face the reality of their choice. Some wrote letters to their loved ones. Some recorded final messages. Some sat awake in the medical bays staring at holo displays, showing what the disease did to the body: blood turning to burning liquid, organs corroding, lungs collapsing from the inside, nerves dissolving like sand in water. No one survived more than 2 days. Once symptoms began 11 days to think about that, 11 days to wonder whether courage was the right word or foolishness, but no one turned back. Then came the Ordera transmission from the Galactic Council: formal, cold, unbending. Human medical intervention is forbidden. Mission must be cancelled. All forces shall withdraw immediately. Liras 9 is to be abandoned. The Council saw the risk. They feared the spread. They would accept extinction to minimize danger. Admiral Herod listened quietly. Then she sent a single reply: did not ask for your permission. Then she cut the channel. Word of the mission spread across human space, at first like whispers, then like wildfire. Soon civilian ships left port. Cargo transports rerouted. Old freighters changed course. Sent to land, not to treat, not to be herospit, to bring supplies: medical capsules, sterile gloves, nutrient fields, portable oxygen generators. Humanity came together not because they expected triumph, but because compassion demanded presence. Be day 8 of the journey. Thousands of tiny human ships escorted the Nightingale through the star lanes, like candles surrounding a hearse. A silent promise: who will not let you go. Alanuan. Liras 9 rose ahead, outlined by the burning sun. Behind it you expected a dead world. Instead, you saw faint lights across the surface, clustered around ruined cities and makeshift camps. That meant one thing: Simeon was still alive. Transports descended through acidic cloud layers. Lightning cracked across the horizon. The skies trembled like they were mourning when The doors opened, you felt the atmosphere sting like needles, metallic, thick, choking bit. People were waiting collapsed against walls, curled beside fallen. Family, children delirious from fever, their eyes emptied by despair. Until they saw you step forward in shock, replaced hopelessness, and doctors had arrived to save. Strangers in a place no one would return from, you knelt beside the first patient. A young Laurassian adolescent, barely breathing, chest rattling with pain. Skin blistered from fever, his gaze trembled as fear controlled his body. He reached weakly toward you. Not knowing whether you were real, you squeezed his hand gently. We are here. You are not alone anymore. And then work began. First 18 hours. Did not feel real. Every moment was motion. Wrap wounds, flush toxins, stabilize neural pathways. Sedate violent spasms, rehydrate the dying. Document everything given without a cure. You could ease suffering, give comfort, prolong breath, protect dignity. Hope was not measured in days, but in minutes and moments, in small mercies, patient by patient, hour by hour, breath by breath. You watch despair turn into something else, a spark, a faint light, a fragile belief that maybe their story was not ending tonight. In the second night, one of your colleagues collapsed while operating. Her vision went dark, her legs gave way. She fell into the surgeon beside her. Everyone froze because you all recognized the signs. First stage infection. She woke hours later, trembling, sweating, barely holding consciousness, but she refused to stay in the ward. She returned to work, hands shaking, voice quiet, determination stronger than fear. Not because she expected survival, but because she would not abandon those who still had breath. That was human nature. 2 days passed without warning or mercy. Time lost meaning. The sun rose and fell behind toxic clouds. Bodies were carried out quietly under shrouds. New patients replaced the lost. You cried once during those days, not from exhaustion, not from fear, but because a Laurassian child took your hand while dying and whispered a word you did not understand. Later you learned its meaning. Hope born from strangership. On the 12th day, history changed. A shout echoed across the camp, then another. Then dozens researchers ran toward the central tent holding data slates. Hands trembling, voices cracking. You grabbed the lead geneticist. Telush choked on her answer. Found resistance. A single child's immune system was adapting, healing, fighting back. It was not a cure, yet not a treatment, not a solution, but it was something no one expected to see again in that place. Possibility. For the first time since you arrived, humanity was not fighting to delay death. Humanity was fighting to save life. Outside sunlight finally pierced the clouds and washed across the camps like golden deep inside. A new thought from Medth's story is not over, not yet, not while breath remains. Not while hope is real, and not while humanity stands beside the dying. No, alone, never alone, because the ending has yet to be written. Hey, everyone are still here, still awake. If you are, that's fine. Take a breath, settle in, because humanity has walked into the fire, and now the galaxy is about to witness what happens next. You lost count of how many lives had slipped through your hands by the time the discovery changed the air of the medical camp for the first time. Since landing on Liras 9, you saw tears that were not born of grief, but one day a child's immune system had adapted. It was small, a faint flicker, but unmistakably real. Humanity knew what that meant. Not hope in theory, but hope with a pulse. The time you reached the research tent, the whole camp buzzed like a living storm. Word spread faster than any medicine could have. Scientists who had been silent for days were suddenly talking again, hands flying across holographic consoles as new data poured in. And then you saw her, Dr. Maya Varan, the geneticist who first discovered the mutation. She stood before a wall of glowing biochemistry strands, her eyes wide, her voice shaking as she spoke. It's weak, still unstable, but the body is fighting back. There's a chance we can replicate it. Those words hit your heart like thunder. A chance, and not a cure, not a guarantee, but something to fight toward. Within the hour, the Nightingale's entire medical wing became a machine with one purpose: isolate the adaptive factor, identify the resisting proteins, find the trigger, find the path, recreate the spark. Every researcher on board stopped sleeping, every medtech stopped counting hours, every doctor supported the data flow while still tending to the dying. There was no time for rest, no time for comfort, no time for fear not anymore. You weren't trying to ease loss, you were trying to defeat it. But the virus was merciless. It struck fast, hard, without warning. 3 more of your colleagues collapsed over the next 2 days. Symptoms: vicious, sudden fevers, bleeding veins beneath the skin. One of them was your friend Jonathan Kale, a radiologist who had made Everyone laughed the first night, a quiet man with soft eyes who carried grief like a secret weight when he fell you held him as he trembled, fever burning through his body. I regret nothing, he whispered. It felt like a blade slipping into your ribs because you believed him deeply, completely. And you hated that belief. Death did not respect hope. It continued its path, patient by patient, doctor by doctor. Disease ate everything in its way. It tore holes into hearts, into memories, into futures that would never arrive. Every morning, the priest from the civilian escort ships held a quiet service outside the camp. No speeches, no names, just light. Humanity mourned, but never slowed. That was the difference. In the 5th day after the discovery, the researchers called you all together there in the briefing chamber, trembled with anticipation. Everyone stood shoulder to shoulder, exhausted, but alert. Dr. Varen spoke again. We've identified the mutation pattern. We think we can replicate it. We can attempt controlled exposure to trigger adaptive resistance in others. A wave of stunned silence rolled across the room. 2,000 doctors stared. You mean? Someone whispered. We might be able to get ahead of it. Varen nodded. Maybe if we begin trials immediately. Admiral Herod looked across her team, eyes fierce with purpose. Then we begin now. The first trial failed. The patients declined rapidly and died within hours. The second failed. The third set resulted in internal collapse. The fourth showed signs of stabilization, but not enough to save those treated. Still, each failure taught something new. Each death carved a new path. Each hour carried meaning. You held onto the belief that the answer was close, very close, just out of reach, yet touchably. Almost through the 6th night, while treating a critical patient, you noticed something strange. A Larassian elder who had been predicted to die hours earlier suddenly stabilized very slightly, but noticeably. His fever dropped. His breathing deepened. The tissue breakdown slowed. You stared astonished, then ran with the data to the research lab. His blood work showed a faint protein similarity to the adaptive mutation from the chilled. A different pattern, but familiar, connected. It wasn't just a single miracle. It was spreading, unsure, chaotic, but spreading. Virus was learning, and the body was learning with it. We're not chasing a cure, Varen whispered. We're chasing evolution for the first time. You allowed yourself to smile, and not a big smile, not a triumphant smile, but the kind born of exhaustion and fragile faith. Humanity was not losing. Humanity was beginning to win, in breath at a time. While the labs worked on restructuring the mutation intentionally, you and the frontline medics continued performing the impossible, caring for thousands with limited supplies, dwindling strength, and the knowledge that many of you were already infected. You washed wounds, held trembling hands, spoke calming words, promised safety. That your heart was unsure of, but your voice made them believe. And belief was medicine. Tooth and came the moment no one expected. A Larassian official arrived in the camp, surrounded by surviving guards, barely able to stand. His scales pale from infection. Bowed to Admiral Herod, then to the medical teams, then to you. And in a weak voice he said, your world has shown mercy beyond reason. We do not deserve this, but we accept it with gratitude. Our ancestors could not express. The elder priest raised his staff and declared, humanity has rewritten destiny here. Even soldiers began to cry quietly. And you realized something deep and overwhelming. This wasn't just medicine. This wasn't just survival. This was the first chapter of a new kind of history. On day 14, everything changed. Researchers succeeded in isolating a stable pattern. Not perfect, not universal, but enough to attempt emergency mass treatment. There were risks, terrible risks, side effects beyond prediction, but the alternative was extinction. Admiral Herod gave the order. Begging deployment. Medical camps erupted into motion. Teams formed around mass injection lines, holding stations, emergency oxygen tents, evac wards for adverse reactions. The sky shook with thunder as storms rolled overhead, as if the world itself held its breath. Rations began lining up. Thousands old, young, injured, dying. You stood at the frontline. Injection post-needle trembling slightly in your hand. Breath steady, heart on a vena. Young girl approached you, barely conscious, fading like a candle in wind. You knelt, looked into her eyes, found fear there, and without thinking you said, you're going to stay. Do you hear me? You're going to stay. She nodded weakly, and you injected her. Then the next patient stepped forward, then the next. Hours passed. Then an entire night. You didn't stop. None of you did. When dawn broke, no one knew whether it had worked. Some seemed better, some worse, some unchanged. The tension was suffocating. No one dared hope to loud listen. The first stabilized patient opened his eyes, fully alert, breathing strong color returning than the second then the child whose mutation started this nightmare's undoing sat up on her bed smiling faintly. A wave of shock and joy broke through the camp. Simeon shouted, someone laughed, someone collapsed crying. You just stood there, hands shaking, unable to process the magnitude of this. Wasn't just survival, this wasn't just medicine, this was life returning. But the cost had been enormous. Many humans were gone, too many to count, too many whose names would never echo through history except in quiet place. Yet none died alone, none faded forgotten. Each life paid forward into countless savedened. You knew deep in your bones that humanity would never be seen the same way again. It after this net by anyone. Yes. The sun slowly bled across the horizon of Liras 9. You walked through the recovering camp's patients sitting upright, breathing fresh air, holding hands with loved ones they thought they'd lost, and somewhere inside yourself you realized something profound. The universe does not remember the powerful or the victorious, not for long, but it remembers those who choose compassion. At the cost of everything, humanity had given their very breath, their very heartbeat, their very lives, for strangers, for hope, for the simple truth that no species deserves to die. Alani and you knew as night fell again this was not the end. The galaxy was changing, history was shifting, destiny was awakening. Humanity was no longer a rumor of courage. Humanity had become the example, symbol of promising the final chapter was still ahead. Hey, everyone are still here, still awake. If you are, that's fine, you made it. We reached the final chapter now. The most human part of all. Settle down, slow your breath, because we are not done yet, not until the last truth is spoken. The sun rose slowly over Liras 9, soft light breaking through the thick clouds like hope, forcing itself through grief. Patient recovery had become real, not rumor, not fragile miracle, but reality beginning to ripple outward like waves over water. And suddenly everything felt different there, tasted kinder. The silence felt lighter. People spoke softly to each other again. Not in mourning, but in wonder. Treatment was working, the adaptive resistance spreading faster than the sickness could destroy. Every hour numbers grew, first hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Lives saved, breaths extended, dreams restored. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Boot you and the others knew what the outside could not see. The price was still rising. Be the 20th day. Almost half the human medical staff had fallen ill, the cost of mercy carving its initials into every heartbeat. Still standing, and yet no one left the front line. No one abandoned their post. No one asked to return home. I understood why this mission was never about survival. It was about meaning, purpose, legacy. Even if that legacy would never reach the ones who gave everything. In the 22nd day, a transmission came through, one that shook every system of power in known space. It was the Galactic Council appearing across the holoscreens. In rigid formation, their voices trembled behind forced calm. To the doctors aboard the Nightingale, to the volunteers on Liras 9, we owe apology, an acknowledgement. You have achieved what we believed impossible. The cure must be shared with the galaxy. Immediate telleth. Admiral stood before them, back straight, eyes unwavering, face carved from conviction, forged by sacrifice. Her reply cut deeper than any weapon ever. Forget this cure was not forged on fleets or debates. It was forged by lives given freely. We will share the science, but we will not allow history to forget what was paid to make it. Relf Council fell silent, unable to argue, unable to breathe, for the truth was overwhelming. Humanity had rewritten fate with bare hands and breaking hearts. Over the following days, the cure prototypes were copied, refined, standardized. Adorable ships arrived with new labs, new scientists, new equipment, new methods. But the foundation, the spark, the impossible first step was human, always human. Yet something had begun gnawing at your soul, a quiet truth you had been ignoring. Your hands trembled more each morning, your legs weakened, your lungs fought with each breath. You knew what it meant. Everyone did. The shadows under your eyes were not lack of sleep. They were stage 1. Illness had reached you, but you smiled still. You worked still. You healed still, because your time still had purpose. And humans had always found meaning inside impossible moments. During your shift in the central ward, you overheard a group of young Lirasians whispering to each other. Their eyes kept glancing toward you. One of them finally approached, nervous, frightened, but determined. Edwy, did you come here? Why fight for us when you knew there was no chance you would survive? Took a breath, steadying yourself. Becca's. If someone calls for help, we answer, even if no one else will. Child stared, eyes wide, trying to understand, compassion without condition. Then she hugged you. Tightly fragile arms trembling, no words came after that, none were needed. Night fell across the camp. Fires burning softly beside tents, and medical structures, warm light glowing through the dark. Like memories made visible, Samin began reading out the names of every human lost so far. Soft voice, trembling against the wind. List was long, far longer than expected. Each name floated through the night air like a prayer made of breath, and for a moment time itself stood still. Not one doctor moved. You closed your eyes, letting every name become a heartbeat. A memoria promiseth, and came another message from orbit. First cure shipment had reached the far colonies, and early tests were succeeding across dozens of outposts across multiple species. The sickness was retreating, the galaxy was healing. Beckows. Humans had refused to abandon hope, but hope is delicate, born from sacrifice. That night you collapsed, not from exhaustion, not from strain, but from final stage progression. Simone carried you gently into the medical tent, voices fading into distant echoes behind your drifting consciousness. Like waves washing over a quiet beach, when you woke, you were hooked to oxygen monitors glowing beside your bed, and Admiral Herod sat silently at your side. Ish spoke softly, "You saved more lives than you could ever count. You have given this galaxy a future, and no one will forget you." Her voice cracked. She had never cried in front of the crew before. Humanity had not come for glory, but glory had found them in the end. Time blurred after that. You drifted in and out, half here, half fading. Doctors you trained worked around you, still treating patients, still saving lives. Every breath a tribute to one given before. You watched their hands steady, focused, determined. The next generation of heroes born inside a tragedy, shaped by compassion. Humanity was no longer just surviving, humanity was teaching. Gone evening. The camp was suddenly silent. No alarms, no cries, no mourning, only peace. When you asked why, a medic smiled softly. There have been no deaths today, no, not one. For the first time since the nightmare began, your eyes filled with tears, but not of grief, tears of relief, of release, of victor. The tide had turned, the battle was won, not through conquest but through compassion. As your final night approached, you requested to be moved outside. Beneath the sky, clouds parted, revealing stars scattered across the darkness. Like ancient lanterns, somewhere among them Earth awaited silently, proudly mourning you. You thought of home, of loved ones, of memories built from laughter and mistakes, of childhood moments that shaped you, of choices that revealed you. And then you thought of the first patient you comforted on this world, the boy whose hand you held in fear and silence survived. He was Olivian. That alone was enough. Admiral stood beside your bed, her voice fragile as she spoke. No one will ever forget what was done here. Your name will echo long after stars fade. You met her gaze one last time. Make sure the story is told not as tragedy, but as proof that we chose. Mercish nodded and promised as your breath slowly settled, your heartbeat slowed, your vision softened. You whispered a final message, tell humanity we answered. Then silence took your body, but not your legacy. Never your legacy. At your memorial, thousands gathered, Larassians, humans, aliens from distant system, children whose lives you saved held candles, their faces glowing with gratitude beyond language. A monument was raised, not of stone, not of metal, but of seeds, living seeds, each one grown from the soil where lives were lost. A living memorial, breathing, growing, enduring forward the truth. Humanity heals even when it costs everything. Years later, historians would write about this mission, politicians would praise it, artists would immortalize it, ancestors would honor it, but the truth was simpler, more fragile, more eternal. 2,000 human doctors stepped into certain death, not seeking honor, not seeking glory, not seeking credit, but because someone cried for help, and humanity answered with open hands. Some called it madness, some called it sacrifice, some called it destiny, but the universe called it something else, a hopper, and undeniable hopia. Reminder that even in the darkest corners, among the coldest stars, compassion can ignite light powerful enough to change the fate of worlds, and that light will never denot as long as humanity breathes.